Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back for some video game news for Monday, November 18th, 2024. So, I'm in a maximum emergency, I would say at this point. And as such, to deal with that, I am doing a lot of just cleaning of house, rearranging, physically cleaning of house. So that is not very video game related and not particularly that interesting. I'm trying to keep an eye out here also to see if variable refresh rate actually will work. Of course, using variable refresh rate is just significantly lowering the kilobits per second. Right now I'm getting like 676 kilobits per second, which might be enough on a static image overall. Like, nothing really is changing. The mouse cursor isn't even moving. If I start to change some of this, then I would expect the kilobits per second would have to bump up eventually, but yeah. The problem there is it just jumped up to like 800 kilobits per second. I just have no idea as far as what the quality is on these streams, and the quality needs to be particularly high because of the text being read. Inherently, there's just this huge penalty in which screens that are designed, or web pages that are designed to be on screens right in front of your face, are just assuming that you're not going to have a streaming aspect to it, and you're not going to go through YouTube and video compression, MPEG-4 compression, or HVEC compression, which is what I'm using now. So it's just a very different type of content when you're targeting a TV, where there almost never is any text on screen, or extremely rarely, or you're targeting a video game that could be sit back and relax played on a TV from 10 feet away or whatever. Actually, it's supposed to be double the, or half the width, so, well, half the diagonal length of a TV. So if you have a 50-inch TV, you're supposed to be sitting probably not 25 inches, probably 100 inches. I've now messed up the math in my head. Yeah, if you have a 50-inch TV, you probably should be sitting 100 inches away, which would be slightly less than 10 feet, since there are 12 inches in a foot. But yeah, it probably is going to be the case for a fairly long amount of time that these streams are going to happen, and I'm going to have nothing to say, which in the long run means there's just going to be less rambling and setup and warm up to these shows. Particularly for the immediate future, as I'm chewing ice, sorry about that. I'm just going to have a lot of other things taking up my time, other schedules. Less than before. In fact, I've already noticed that I'm just regaining some of my time back and can actually accomplish things. It's just the things I have to focus on and accomplish right now are not YouTube video game related. So getting back to playing Borderlands pre-sequel, for instance, is going to be probably fairly hard to do. And there certainly might be a mood aspect to that too, where I just wouldn't feel good about making YouTube content when there's slightly more productive things that I need to be doing. Right now, particularly, I'm waiting for a package to be delivered, and it somehow got set up as the package is going to be delivered and set up in my house, so I actually have to be there, and it's not just going to be left at the front door. So yeah, it is great certainly that nowadays you really don't do a lot of signature required deliveries, depending on where you live. Like, certainly if you're living in a 5-story walk-up with no person at the door, then signature package deliveries are still a thing very commonly, like in New York. Otherwise, people will steal your packages like crazy. But in most of the United States, I would say, particularly with Amazon.com, they just leave the package. They don't require signatures. They don't care. They're willing to take the loss if somebody steals something. Although, you will see a lot of news that is actually just advertisement from Nest video doorbells more than anything. That porch theft is on the rise. I don't think it really is. Package delivery is on the rise, but I bet the percentage is about the same as it possibly ever was. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of things where Google will advertise the Nest camera in the major stations of, say, ABC, just to pick one of the major local broadcasters. And as such, they will have advertisements hidden as news stories, or news stories that are only written because they were paid for by Google for the Nest products. And certainly that makes those stories seem more attractive to make, and might get the local TV stations, which are just repeating the same news stories, often verbatim, from the major market news stories. There is a ABC corporate that actually was owned by Disney, if we're going to get into real details, that will be writing all the national news stories, and they will hand the national news stories to the local TV stations, and the local TV stations could not go with those national news stories if they wanted to, but they have nothing better to say. There aren't real journalists on local TV, really. There might be one journalist working on one story, and that's about it. And working on one story may take months, if not years, to get that one story to happen. And certainly if you look at like Good Morning America and some of those daytime quote-unquote news stories, they have significant amounts of commercials in them selling products, if not selling people and celebrities also to go watch movies or watch TV shows. There really isn't that much news in one day worth knowing, which certainly makes the ridiculousness of 24-hour news stations. If you actually sat around for even 12 hours and watched all of them, you would be amazed by how much they just repeat the same stories over and over again. Anyways, I'm supposed to be talking about video games, so I am still playing Memento Mori. It's once again gotten updated. I'm still playing the new Pokemon card game. I did find out that there was an old Pokemon card game that has a lot more cards, but also is rated 2.2 out of 5 on the Google Play Store. So, yeah, it doesn't seem like people are particularly happy with it. And that's probably why they came out with the new card game. But yeah. I don't even want to bother to make an account for the old Pokemon card game just to see what its deal is. I'm not playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, even though I'm still logging in and getting the rewards. It does seem like maybe because the old Pokemon card game had slightly newer expansions, there are cards that seem like they do a little bit more. Whereas I feel like the expansion that they're starting with on the new card game has extremely simple Pokemon. They have like one attack. Not a lot of them do anything special other than do damage. And certainly the EX Pokemon are the ones that seem to have more 2 attacks to them, or do something special, or just have more attack health and attack damage. So it's kind of a slow start, although I question if it would be a good starting point 6 months from now or a year from now if somebody just got into the Pokemon trading card game, or would they already at that point be overwhelmed by several expansions that make the Pokemon card game more complicated, although I don't think it ever gets that complicated compared to something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic the Gathering, or if they're just going to be too far behind because there's too many cards to try to catch up and collect. Ideally, there would be a reduction in the cost of getting older packs, which is something you really could only do digitally, because older packs tend to have an increased cost, not a reduction in cost. But also, it's important to point out that the Pokemon card game, the new Pokemon card game on Android, is still very much not focused on actually having you play Pokemon. That is still hidden on the third tab at the bottom, whereas when you log in, you're seeing screens to go to the storefront and to open up more packs, and that's what they want you to focus on and do. And still, as far as I can tell, there's only maybe 12 cards that have that special new art style that they advertised in the trailer. Everything else looks exactly the same as the cards, I assume. And the Marvel Snap putting effects over the cards nonsense is not going to go anywhere, I'm sure. I hope they pivot away from that fairly quickly, as I will also pivot away from my chart fairly quickly today, as I'm still sure not too much has changed, although my understanding of the world has changed somewhat. I believe it is this Hearts of Iron 4 that recently released a update that lets you play as alternate history Germany, and that seemed to be very highly received by fans of Hearts of Iron, which is those war strategy gamers are very different from your Counter-Strike 2 gamers. In fact, that's an interesting thought as far as how many different subsects of people are on this chart, as far as how many, because gamers really aren't a community. Almost everybody games. The only person I know in my life that doesn't game at some level, whether it's playing solitaire or playing Candy Crush, and I truly believe does not play any games at all of their own free accord, is, in my opinion, divergent as far as a personality and as far as the way that person thinks. So, yeah. Counter-Strike 2 gamers, PUBG gamers, Dota gamers. I would say PUBG and Counter-Strike 2 very possibly the same community. Dota 2 probably not the same community. Banana players are looking for money, completely different community. And let's face it, a lot of bots in Banana and Counter-Strike 2, and very likely in all of these top tier. Naraka Blade Point is probably almost certainly a different community, although it might be the same community as Black Myth Wukong. I could also see Black Myth Wukong being more of the Demon Souls, Dark Souls style players. And so, if that is their main style, and that's what they're playing mostly, I would say they're a different group of people. Not to say that there aren't going to be people that play all of these games. Apex Legends, probably not too different from the Dota style of players. Rust, I think, is more of a survival game. Stardew Valley, probably a whole nother group. Call of Duty players, probably not outside of the same group as Counter-Strike 2 players, but I wouldn't be surprised if a significant number of them only main Call of Duty or only main Counter-Strike 2, but I certainly would put them in the Gamer Bro first-person shooter style players. War Thunder is a war sim, so that's a whole nother group. Once Human is more of a fantasy game, so I'd say that's probably more of a group. Baldur's Gate 3, an RPG fantasy game. Maybe close to Once Human. Deadlock, definitely same Counter-Strike 2 style players in my mind. Apex Legends style players. Monster Hunter World is possibly in the same group as like Black Myth Wukong players. Football Manager 2024 is a completely different group. Civ 4, or Civ 6 here would be a completely different group. Warframe might be in the same group as War Thunder. Team Fortress 2, same as Counter-Strike 2. Rainbow Six Siege, probably the same group as Call of Duty. DayZ might be in the same group as Rust. Dead by Daylight is a completely different style game, so I'd say that's a different player. Elden Ring, obviously back to Black Myth Wukong, same group. And then Hearts of Iron might again be in the Warframe. So just on this top chart of the most consecutive players, games that have been played the most, there is definitely an aspect here where there's like a dozen at least of subsets of people that play games, certainly, but really wouldn't play the same games. And it is beating a well-worn drum, certainly, to point that out, because yeah, it's very much the same as like books and movies and music. Music's probably the best example. People that listen to country western mainly are not also likely to be the same type of people that listen to rap, and the people that listen to rap are not likely to be the same people to listen to K-pop. That these are all just very wide, very open genres in which there's a lot of entertainment under those categories. And it certainly is just a previous generation not wanting to understand that continues to push this idea of gamers as a whole community, which, yeah, it's pretty obvious that that is not the case. Part of my problem, I will say, without trying to go into too much details, well, I believe Half-Life 1 or Half-Life 2 episode 1 and 2 are free at the moment. I already own it, but that seems like it's a big deal, and there seems to be a developer commentary mode that's been added that seems like a fairly big deal. People are talking about that quite a bit. But yeah, part of my problem as far as cleaning house is that to clean one room is to reduce so much usable square footage that I am really going to go in circles and then end up putting stuff back in a clean, nearly empty room. Part of this certainly is because while I am throwing away a lot of stuff, there's stuff there that I perceive has at least a couple dollars worth of value, enough to justify doing a yard sale at some point in the mid future. But yeah, cleaning one room tends to dirty the next. And so it is this weird game of Tetris. Now, how could I have solved that? Certainly the solution would have been to more progressively gotten rid of things earlier instead of letting it build up, which wasn't completely under my control, or more progressively have a empty garage. Of course, most people can tell you, most homeowners who have garages can tell you that the only way you have maintain an empty garage is through a lot of perseverance, and it almost never is going to happen You can certainly have garages that actually are used to put cars in them, but even at that, things tend to get added there. But yeah, for my case, had my garage been empty, then I could certainly put all of the garage sale stuff in there and used up that room. But yeah, I definitely am moving in the right direction, though. It's just going to be a lot of work. A lot of work. Not this time as much decision-making problems. Let's go through the Video Games Chronicle stories. Doesn't look like we have too many of them, actually. And yeah. Just this time I can certainly throw away a lot more stuff than I normally would have been able to. So the LEGO Horizon Adventure sets have been confirmed for 2025. I have a massive backlog of Legos, and with small exceptions, I don't expect I'll be buying any more Legos for a long time. But yeah, I would say it looks like this set is several pieces. I don't even know, having not played the Ryzen games, who Varl is. But for $80, I wouldn't say this is particularly that impressive. But this might also give you a general idea more as to what the LEGO game is going to play like. In particular, it makes me suspect that it is going to be a two-player co-op LEGO game like the previous Telltale LEGO games, although Traveler's Tales, or TT Games as it's more often referred to. But yeah, your big pieces here are getting split between two robots. Your minifigs have a little bit of accessories, but that's not really going to be that much. And then your small pieces as far as landscaping and settings are particularly small. It's not going to make a particularly interesting diorama. And even in this picture you can see that they have faded out backgrounds and a rock that's not part of the set for this character to stand on, and then they're covering over a lot of this, and there's some plants here that aren't included and plants here that aren't included, and just covering up more of it here. Yeah, it's not a particularly impressive set. So Stephen King also has said he was leaving Twitter/X. It looks like Video Games Chronicle also is moving over to Blue Sky. Now, my transition here has been to go directly to people's websites and not end up going to Blue Sky and then having Blue Sky fail and then move on to the next account. So this doesn't really affect me, but it does certainly hint at there is a slowly moving process of people, or companies in particular, moving to Blue Sky. Although inherently I'm still at the exact same spot I am before, until I see like YouTube actually having an account on Blue Sky and YouTube actually responding to complaints on Blue Sky. Then the default focus for me is to always go to Twitter and complain to YouTube when your channel gets deleted, because that's the only thing that's really helped. Or if it was an internal process that actually worked, then you would do that too. But there's certainly more advantage in publicly shaming YouTube for deleting channels. But yeah, in fairness, I will also say I'm not really going to Twitter either, or X. Like, I'm not looking at it before or after streams anymore. Occasionally I'll just scroll down it and see what has been posted. There's still a lot of smaller people that I don't believe are on Blue Sky. So that's more of the issue, is that like the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas, for instance, I don't believe is on Blue Sky. That would be one of the sources I would like to follow and see some news about. I did also see that apparently a Universal Kids facility is being built in Frisco, Texas. So it seems like they are trying to make that a smaller secondary Orlando, Florida type location, although it is very small compared to the new Universal Studios in Florida that they're building, and they haven't confirmed what is going to be there at all other than just a hotel. But yeah, it certainly would make sense to get away from Florida as far as hurricane season's hurting travel and just hurting rides that probably need constant repair from rust and humidity and things. But yeah, it also makes some sense to have a Disneyland type place in the middle of the country where the drive and flight is a little bit shorter. Yeah. And I don't think the building restrictions or the politics are particularly too different in Texas than they are in Florida as far as getting away with cheap non-union labor and building on cheap land with little oversight from the government, which is why Disney World is where it is. Of course, that doesn't have anything to do with video games. See, PS5 Pro owners complain about some of the Pro enhanced games looking worse. Silent Hill 2 and Star Wars Jedi Survivor reportedly have issues due to the PS5 Pro's upscaling technique. To me, I heard DF Retro talking about this a little bit, and I guess that is the one podcast I am still listening to, and I feel like they're okay because they really only have a bias towards quality as far as I can tell, and that's about it. They barely even talk about games as much as they just happen to mention games in the pursuit of quality. I think DF Retro might be the kind of people that would love just a tech demo to talk about for 2 hours more than actually talk about a game. They don't actually try to review games. But yeah, listening to them, and best as I can figure, it seems to me like Sony probably gave some basic instructions on how to upscale or automatically upscales visuals, and so on that there was some games where very little effort, maybe no effort, was put into the upscale, and no human eye actually even bothered to play the game after that upscaling happened. Or they may have just said, well, it looks better 90% of the time, but 10% of the time it looks worse, and made those kinds of compromises. Of course, that's not what Sony wants, and so they really needed a seal of quality there and needed to not be upscaling things. There is probably an issue here, if I was just to venture a wild guess, of the fact that there is, for some of these games, particularly like the PS4, the Unreal Engine 4 games, there probably is a fairly low 700, 800p resolution for the base resolution of how the image is generated, and then there might be 2, 3, maybe even 4 upscaling techniques that are happening after that, each of which may be followed by some kind of visual filtering enhancement techniques to sharpen the images after it's been upscaled so it doesn't look blurry. Which, yeah, there's definitely a lot of room for error in that if it's just not being done in a well thought out way. And I would say this is probably a good example of how more and more of the visuals of games, of a lot of games, are being built around lies instead of around the reality of what is being rendered. And at a certain point you get into something very similar to the AI generated content issue, where the human artistic hand is becoming less and less of a element to the art, and more of it is just being generated through a cold, unthinking, unknowing algorithm. Which, when you're particularly trying to depict human faces and human hair and human emotions and reactions, makes the uncanny valley show up very quickly. Half-Life 2, being given away for free, has broken its concurrent Steam players record 20 years after its release. Valve's surprise update and temporary free giveaway boosted Half-Life 2's Steam numbers. I don't feel like this is an actual image from the original Half-Life 2. This seems like a very good render of Gordon Freeman, although I'm not even sure if this is supposed to be half Gordon Freeman and half Gabe Newell. They put out a new picture of Gabe Newell, by the way, and he's still looking healthier. And more people are coming out now after the new pictures and saying, yeah, he definitely looked unhealthy previously. But in fairness, I mean, he is also old, and he is also overweight still, so there's still a lot of direction he could go to be healthier, I'm sure. But yeah. SteamDB's doesn't have the original release numbers because they only go back to 2008 and the game came out before then. But it is also a sad statement that it's been 20 years now since Half-Life 2 was released and we still haven't gotten Half-Life 2 Episode 3 or Half-Life 3. I feel like this was yet another project where fans did a lot of the work, and Valve internally probably did very little of the work for this update. And yeah, I still feel like Valve is probably understaffed for what they should be and for as much money as they probably have. And there is arguably perhaps a capitalism issue here in that a lot of the profits of Valve are probably going out as far as bonuses or just in salary to shareholders of this internal company, instead of that money being forced by some kind of regulation to be reinvested into the company in some way. Yeah. That if there were just a maximum salary cap or a maximum compensation cap on every person in the United States, that you could only take home $1 million a year, or you could only take home even $1 billion a year, which that would affect far fewer people. But if that was the case, then either they would have to start paying their lowest level employees up more money towards that maximum compensation cap, or they'd have to reinvest. And I imagine they would want to reinvest more than paying people more money. which what would reinvestment really look like to Valve? At a certain point, they probably would do some frivolous things, build a big building, decorate it too nicely, but eventually they'd have to hire more people to fill that building. They'd have to start more projects and continue working on more projects. There's room certainly to improve Steam, at least visually, but also into a more modern style of website that perhaps was a bit faster, loaded a bit faster, and navigated a little bit faster. It would be an interesting test, certainly, to sit down 5 average gamers and say, you're going to start at the Steam front page, and we want you to navigate to a game that you would like to buy and start that game, and just run a timer as far as how far from the front page do you go before you find a game you want to buy to start, and then you download it and hit play on it. And if you took those 5 gamers and you said you have to buy a new game that isn't already on your library in particular, that would be the real trick, is that we want you to log into your own personal account. You can't rebuy anything you've already purchased. You can't play something you already purchased. From the front page, find something new and start playing, and just see how long the timer goes there, or see how long until they just give up and get bored. Because honestly, I don't think it's a very good experience. I definitely think Amazon.com's front page is a little bit better, and I don't even think that's particularly a great experience. I don't know if there is a storefront that has a great experience as far as how can we get this person interested in some way or some other. I think actual stores are much better at it, where you go into a store and there's just a lot of different things in a lot of different directions to catch your attention. Plus, there tends to be a natural flow in an actual store, as far as pretty much in every super Walmart, you're supposed to come in, and often the doors only let you in on the right side, and then you're supposed to loop all the way around the perimeter, maybe zigzagging up and down the central aisles to the left side, which almost always the bakery is on the left side and freezer section is on the left side. So you wouldn't go there first, because then you would have to leave, otherwise the freezer section stuff would melt in a super Walmart. And that's very intentional. And usually in a super Walmart, they have clothes and items you're less likely to see or look at in the middle of the store, where you're least likely to zigzag through it. But yeah, there really is no equivalent as far as the Steam front page goes. Well, not really. Anyways, I'm kind of rambling here. I am not dropping frames, but also I have to admit that the variable frame rate here is not going very high either. I'm still averaging, it seems to be, around 680 kilobits per second, which, yeah, that bitrate seems really, really low. I'll have to look at the quality and see if there's something else I can tweak to make the quality better without without increasing the frame rate or doing something else. Let's see. Moving on, Final Fantasy VII Remakes Part 3 plot is complete as the game enters full production. The director of Final Fantasy VII's third party offers first hints. It probably wasn't too hard to complete the plot of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, since for the most part it's going to follow the same story beats of the original Final Fantasy VII game. We know some things have changed, and a few tweaks are being made here and there, giving this kind of alternate timeline feel to it, but in the end, I don't think they're going to stray too far away from the feel of the original game. The biggest change they could probably make is the killing off of one character. Maybe a different character will be killed off, or maybe nobody will be killed off, and that's about it. What I don't really have a lot of faith in is that this would open up the door to the characters of Final Fantasy VII continuing on in a new Final Fantasy. What? I mean, it would have to be 17 at this point, which I guess maybe that might make some sense in a Japanese way of thinking, to say, hey, let's remake Final Fantasy VII and then make 3 games be really just a teaser to a Final Fantasy 17 with the same characters. Which, yeah, I could see that happening, but I don't know if it's gonna catch enough people's attention. Even this remake has taken so long to come out that I'm not sure it's catching enough people's attention. I think even in Japan, it's just a different generation of gamers now. People that maybe had older brothers playing Final Fantasy VII versus people who actually played Final Fantasy VII themselves. And so, yeah. I just don't think Square Enix is going to be able to survive just reliving the past. That being said, I'm sure everybody who does have fond memories of Final Fantasy VII, I hope that they continue to have fond memories playing the 3rd game. It would be incredibly crazy though if the story and the plot changed that much. The Game Awards has already scheduled its event, which I'm not sure when it actually occurs. On YouTube, there's just a video scheduled. But they've come out and said that DLC remakes and remasters will be eligible for Game of the Year, which they basically said that there are no real limitations on the voting group of people who vote for these, which the problem with the Game Awards, and I'm pretty sure I said this last time the Game Awards happened, is that it is definitely not a popular vote awards, and so we desperately need somebody else, probably not being run by Jeff Keighley, to have a People's Choice Game Awards event. Even if the awards would be almost exactly the same, it just feels weird that a lot of very no-name video game websites are included in the jury pool of who's voting for games. It is kind of crazy, and if you go down the whole list of the jury pool, you won't recognize most of the websites' names, and none of it will make any real sense to you. Of course, it could be worse. It could be a scenario where it was just GameSpot, which I'm not sure GameSpot even exists now, Giant Bomb, Kotaku, Eurogamer. If it was just like 5 people voting on games, that'd be even worse, certainly, but it is not very good. People's Choice Awards would be very good, much better. So certainly this opens up the possibility of Shadow of the Erdtree being eligible for Game of the Year from the Game Awards. Which also we have to point out that this has been an incredibly terrible year for video games anyway, so I would have to see a list of games that were even released in 2024 to try to make an argument that Shadow of the Erdtree isn't actually the best game of the year. Although, now that Episode 2 was released as a updated version, which would be either DLC or remasters. There is also an argument that Half-Life 2 should be Game of the Year for 2024, which is ridiculous to say. At least the DLC for Shadow of Erdtree makes some sense. So updates probably, in my mind, shouldn't be considered. Jeff Keighley certainly tries to not be too involved. I don't think he really cares what games get awards or not. I think he's really just running the show to try and make himself look prestigious and rub elbows with prestigious people, at the very least prestigious video game developers. And it is a kind of ridiculous goal anyways, in my opinion, because he wants the Game Awards to be the Oscars and Emmys of video games, which he may very well succeed at that, not by making the Game Awards better, but by just simply waiting long enough for people to realize how awful the Oscars and Emmys have gotten. I suppose if I was going to run a Game Awards, much like my thought that somebody needs to make a IMDb for developers, programmers, as far as just here's a LinkedIn/IMDb type website that lists everybody and credits everybody properly, I would certainly heavily want that same kind of Game Award type experience where we are listing out the names of everybody who actually worked on the game, down right to the QA testers and the interns that were just bringing coffee to people, or secretaries, things like that. And certainly, I guess if I had the funding and the time, and I were going to make an IMDb type website like that, I probably could see doing an annualized Game Awards just as a way of self-promoting the website. We could put little QR codes on the screen to credit everybody, and speak more in generalities during the presentations and not waste people's time by speaking out everybody's name. You could put a scroll of everybody's name at the bottom and top just to have everybody credited as much as possible. We could certainly go with major sponsors if anybody would sponsor it, and give away some form of at least certificates, if not, I don't know, gift cards or something. That would be a little low for winning a Game of the Year award, but heck, it would be something. Certificates is probably the right move to start with. But yeah, you don't see that in the Oscars and the Emmys either. You don't see people getting the credits that they deserve. It's usually the producer or the director that gets up there, and then there might be 10 or 20 other people standing behind him, but that's more than likely the middle management, producers and directors and executive producers standing behind him, and maybe some celebrity actors. But you don't have script supervisors and gaffers standing on the stage when awards are given at the Oscars or Emmys either. They're not even in the audience. Moving on back to Video Games Chronicle news, Patapon's spiritual successor Rydo gets a new trailer confirming platforms. It's coming to all major platforms next year, which is an interesting argument as far as what is not a major platform at this point. Not mobile, I guess. Yeah. The Half-Life 2 20th anniversary documentary shows off unseen episode 3 footage, which I guess was what this screenshot is from. There's also a whole thing in the documentary where Viacom was trying to bankrupt and screw over Valve and nearly succeeded. They were filing these lawsuits in Korea, in Korean language, and there happened to be one unnamed intern that could read the Korean and went through all these legal documents and found apparently some evidence of them, Viacom, destroying evidence, which lost them the case. But yeah, it's probably much ado about nothing nowadays, but it does probably open the door for more research on just how awful was Viacom as a looming threat. Like, I know personally that there was a long history of Viacom, I'm pretty sure it was Viacom, trying to purchase Ubisoft, and with this new revelation, it definitely seems like Viacom would have not done anything great. And Viacom does not make games and does not publish games, at least under that name. I think probably because Viacom at some point was merged with CBS Viacom, and was more just in the TV and movie focus for a while there. And I'd have to look it up on Wikipedia just to see what company it was absorbed by or what name it changed itself to. If it was CBS now, well, CBS is not making any games. I always confuse Viacom with like Vivendi, and I'm pretty sure Viacom is the French company that Napoleon created for his like cousin, just pure nepotism, and gave all of the viaduct rights to, thus the via name in it. So he just gave like a pure monopoly to a cousin via nepotism, and it created this huge business, which, yeah, it's not really a great situation. Yep. And that happens more often than you would think, is that you have these countries that are fairly big, but also kind of fairly new in their current form of governance. You see it in South Korea too with Samsung, where there's just not enough of a desire for small businesses, and so there are these just like giant corporations that come about, and I can't help but expect that some of the blame lands firmly at the feet of the United States, in that the United States, being such a large landmass and such a big economic player, probably does have corporations that are doing more business than entire countries, like South Korea or France. And so when you have the likes of Boeing and such as competition, I could see how a lot of countries would say, well, the only way this is going to work and we're going to be competitive on the global market is by allowing giant monopolistic companies to exist. Nintendo themselves probably an example of that, where if there perhaps was less world economic pressure and less just global trade overall, a lot of countries probably would succeed fairly well with just having a whole bunch of really small businesses, which I think the populace of a country probably benefit a lot more by having small businesses, small to medium-sized businesses, instead of giant corporations. There's very little benefit to the end user to have giant corporations. Of course, he did just allow tons of mergers and layoffs to happen all around the world in the video game industry. PlayStation's Black Friday deals leaked. Big PS5, PSVR 2 discounts. PS5 Slim is reportedly getting a big price cut for Black Friday. Also, Remedy's Sam Lake is set to receive the New York Awards show top honor. The creative director is going to accept the Legend Award from New York Video Games Critics. I think we'd already covered that story. Yep. Then I'm trying to just make a list of all the pages that are being left open that should have been closed. Alright, that's going to bring us to the Gamatsu news. Hitman World of Assassination for the PSVR 2 has been delayed to March 27, 2025. I have not heard anything about this game, so I would assume they were laying low because they were struggling with development. I've heard something about it a long time ago, but I haven't heard anything recently. Let me correct myself there. Alien Rogue Incursion has a story trailer. Bleach Rebirth of Souls character trailer for Grimjow is... I'm not even going to try and pronounce his second name. Yeah, Bleach Rebirth of Souls. They are now at the season 3 of the 1,000 Years Blood Arc reboot of Bleach, I guess, and it does just kind of seem like they are going in circles with fighting people, which is kind of the problem that's happened in previous arcs of the original Bleach series too, is that you would think you were about to fight the final boss and that would be the end of that arc, and then it starts all over again and you have to fight him all over again. I just don't think I really like the pacing. And I can't really say that I find anything particularly interesting in the current enemies in the 1,000 Year Blood Arc, or anything new or fun about them. Let's see. Atelier Yumiya, the Alchemist of Memories and the Envisioned Land synthesis trailer. 30 minutes of gameplay are available on Gamatsu if you want to check that out. A 2D life simulation action RPG called Call of Elandra has been announced for PC, which we have that Steam link and now open. I watched a funny movie, and the name's going to get me in trouble here, but it is the actual name of the movie on Amazon Prime, so take it. And I will start by saying I really enjoyed this movie, and I would recommend everybody watch it. I could see a lot of people not being willing to watch it, just because of the name, just because of the feel of it at the beginning. There is also a point to be made that the majority of the movie at the front is intentionally saying the wrong things and sending the wrong messages, and it is not any huge powerful revelation at the end. It's just you get to the end and that revelation is mentioned and shown to say, hey, everything we've been saying up until this point has been the wrong message, has been something that is not going to work, and you were following along the journey of someone who had to come to that realization themselves. And yeah, I think for a lot of people that would be obvious. For some people it would. It is a story certainly around a lot of things that were talked about even 100 years ago in America, as far as appeasement between people of African descent, black people and white people in America, as far as the idea of appeasement, where appeasement almost never works. So now I'll tell you the name and hope you won't get too turned off on that. There's also a romance plot that's pretty good in the middle there, but the name of the movie on Amazon Prime is the American Society of Magical Negroes, which even in the name they make fun of and say this name is old and not something you would use in modern time. There is a very small amount of actual magic in the movie. They are magical, but that's not really what the movie is about. It is not a Harry Potter parody at all. And even like the things you would think are unimportant turn out to be more important as you go through the movie. But yeah, because it is making the message of appeasement and how that really wouldn't work, that there is this possibility that people would get the wrong message or not understand the message that was being said, and that might affect your enjoyment on the first watch through, or might be a more difficult first watch through because of that. But I did want to recommend that movie because of the few garbage movies I've watched lately. Actually, I've watched a lot of garbage over the past year or so. This one actually deserves a shout out. And one thing I will also applaud the movie for, it doesn't make the white people come off as just mustache twirling evil, nor does it use the phrase, "It's not my job to educate you," which is, while true, never helpful in any situation. Like, so that I'm glad that they don't go in that direction. Yeah, in fact, it really is not a movie at all about white people at all. Like, it's not trying to preach to them at all. It is really preaching African people preaching to African people, and it's a journey non-African people can watch and follow and learn from. But yeah, the white people in the movie are actually just background characters that barely matter. Which is ironic once you see the movie. Anyways, back to sort of video game news. They have opened at Gematsu an open forum number 345 with off-topic discussions. I don't know why they would do that and why there's a number here, unless that just means that they've opened forums and then they've shut them down after there was either too much not safe for work content, trolling and spamming. The problem here is whatever rules you put here, there's just entire nations worth of bots that are going to try and spam nudity and not safe for work and trolling and just spamming in general. And I don't know why you would want off-topic conversations at all. I just don't see a reason for it at all. Let somebody go somewhere else. Let them go to Reddit. Let them go to True Social, wherever you want to go to do that. But as far as Gematsu and what its website and its bandwidth should be focused on, it should be video game stuff. And if I was going to have forums where I was trying to get more engagement, I would definitely try and curate it and say, this week we're discussing the best action game, the best shooters, the best things like that. We'd go through a list of categories that were video game related, at least. This week's Japanese game releases: Disney Music Parade Encore, Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection, Arcade Classics, and more. Yes, that I think this is still Japanese only, this Disney Music Parade, which it's weird that it's Japanese only. Maybe there's some musical rights issues that could only get cleared in Japan. Or maybe it's a case that Bob Iger only really sees any value in Disney's history of music and Disney and Mickey Mouse to be sold outside of the United States, where inside the United States it's all focused on Star Wars and Marvel movies. Let's see. Venus Vacation Prism Dead or Alive Extreme has detailed the owner's job and 14 minutes of gameplay. As far as I could understand it, it was a visual novel romance game, so I wouldn't expect that you would do too much other than serve the needs and wants of these women and try to increase your relationship with them. Wouldn't be surprised if there's a photography mode where in canon you are taking photo shoots of some of them. Yeah, here's a camera, so that seems like there's at least a camera mode, but I don't think you're gonna do too much. There's probably an end of day recap, and this might be a fairly difficult game in which you're balancing out who you're spending your time with and balancing out how much money you're spending, which seems to be a factor too. So seems like they're saying you spent 840 yen that day. Well, actually it says chapter 7 result, so you might have to go through the entire chapters. Seems like most of the characters will be in some form of bikini, but it's not a micro bikini or anything super skimpy by modern standards. Yeah. In fact, a lot of them seem to be fairly covered up even in that. Seems to be more high fashion than high amount of skin showing. I guess you might call this a school outfit, schoolgirl outfit, but it's not particularly detailed, specific. Noticeably, no beach ball here, no volleyball, no butt bumping against each other or fighting on the pool on floating rafts with sticks. Which those are the kind of things you might expect. It seems like there's not even a lot of running on the beach or racing or smashing watermelons, kind of beach type activities that you would see happen. It looks like it's a lot of conversation and a lot of walking. So I can't help but feel like it's been scaled down. And honestly, I'm not sure that the visuals here are really getting that much of an improvement either. So the original focus of these styles of games for the beach volleyball games was so that Dead or Alive could improve its visual engines as far as hair tech and movement tech and just body framing and just making it look as realistic as possible. I'm not sure this game is even really accomplishing that goal that much, or if this is more of an obligation thing where they just feel like they're obliged to make something under the Venus Vacation title. And this may very well be the last Venus Vacation title ever made. Ratatan is going to be published by the Game Source Entertainment, and the We Play Expo 2024 trailer is available. Yeah. Tomb Raider 4, 5, and 6 Remastered has detailed its photo mode, which I guess will have a very different collection of photos here. In that, yeah, while you probably can take photos, it's going to be a very simplistic experience for these remakes or remasters of simplistic games. This game has the Lara Croft model that looks a lot better than this, which is really bad. But yeah, this is certainly a much older game, a collection of games, and certainly a very different experience than Venus Vacation Prism. Real Heroes Firefighter HD is coming to the PS5 on December 6th. It's currently available for the Xbox One and PC. And that brings us to Gaming on Linux articles. I'm not sure 100% of all of those articles didn't have Steam links, but it seems like most of them did get opened. The single-player horror game Sorry We're Closed is out now and should work great on the Steam Deck. Should work is an interesting phrase to have in your head, which I guess I'm still not getting any Steam links from that. I didn't work on it, did I? No. Yeah, and I don't know if I'm gonna have free time to work on any of that anytime soon. Devs of chill arcade free writing game SNO Ultimate Free Writing uses the Steam Deck as the performance target. The unofficial port of Zelda Majora's Mask. Alright, well, before I talk about that, I'm going to have to take a bathroom break. Just interrupt myself here. So I'm going to pause the recording and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back, and apparently the time has changed over, so I can open a pack here. I just saw that there's now a Raspberry Pi 5 case that holds a Raspberry Pi 5 in a case that is designed to look like the original boxy NES format, which, yeah, if you were going to do a RetroPie thing, you would use a Raspberry Pi 5 at this point. Not that you're really getting a significant amount of improvement in quality, because let's just be honest here, the RetroPie build hasn't really made any major improvements or updates, and so you really could still run RetroPie on a Raspberry Pi 3B and probably get about the same experience, unless you're specifically targeting Nintendo 64 games, which I'm not sure Nintendo 64 games, even on a Raspberry Pi 5, perform really any better. You're also in a very weird position, certainly, in that the Raspberry OS, which was originally based on Debian and probably still is based on Debian but has its own name now, has committed to moving to Wayland as its desktop compositor in its desktop mode, which Wayland probably will be a different thing and maybe even a little bit more performant, but it's still not what RetroPie was doing. RetroPie was directly drawing using custom software to get every bit of frame rate as possible. It was very much closer to an embedded system than your standard generic operating system. So unless RetroPie made some major updates, which eventually will probably be pushed into doing that to support Wayland, and then there was some major improvement in emulation that Wayland helped, which it very well might not, you're still in this weird situation where you're probably paying more than you need to get a Raspberry Pi 5 to get it to emulate old games, and when all is said and done, you're probably going to have spent $100 to $200 on that whole setup, when that would have gotten you halfway there to a cheap Steam Deck, which is just going to be a way better experience as far as emulation. Just way more generations of consoles that could be emulated, a much higher possibility of things running well and smoothly, the ability to play modern games, certainly. And yeah, so I still feel like it's a case that after RetroPie and the Raspberry Pi 3B really came out, they just haven't improved fast enough or gone in that direction. And in fairness, the Raspberry Pis were designed to be more educational, small things and cheaper things, and they're not even that cheap now. And making them game emulation stations would just further push them into more expensive custom hardware that would not be useful for anything else. And the idea from Raspberry Pi almost certainly was to sell Raspberry Pis to schools and the STEM classes, and raising the price just so that gamers are happy would hurt their target audience and their target sales. And you are in the Raspberry Pi, you're still using an ARM based chip, a reduced instruction set chip, where the Steam Deck is using a complete instruction set AMD 64 chip. So there's just going to be more processing and better power there. I wouldn't say it's a case that the Steam Deck killed the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi itself, due to the pandemic, kind of just strangled itself to death by not having enough components out at the price they should have been out at for a long time. And mostly they've hurt themselves more recently by going public in the UK and being much more focused, I think, in the future around making profits than actually being educational or being a good value. Moving on, the unofficial PC port of Zelda Majora's Mask to ship to Harkinian has a big new release out. I don't know what this means. Is this the name of it? To ship to Harkinian? Yeah, I guess this might be the official name. To ship to Harkinian. It was released originally back in May. To ship to Harkinian allows you to play Nintendo Zelda Majora's Mask properly on PC with a new release just shipped. Release Satoko Alpha 1.1.0 went out over a week ago, plus Satoko Bravo 1.1.1 a few days ago to clean up some issues. This is the kind of thing you would need to download quickly, although I'm sure people will put it up on the dark web and torrent sites too, but I imagine this is something Nintendo does not like existing in the world. It's under the Creative Commons 0 1.0 universal license and has releases for Linux, macOS, and Windows. But yeah, Majora's Mask perhaps not the most popular of the Zelda games, but popular enough, I'm sure. Some crazy naming there, though, I will say. OpenRA for classic real-time strategy games like Red Alert has a new playtest with enhanced visuals, revamped map editor. I guess that is a thought. Certainly as far as would this be something worth looking at if I was going to go through the Red Alert games and the Command & Conquer games? Or is this a kind of pointless side quest unless you're playing specifically on Linux and for some reason you can't get the original game to run on Linux? I have made this exception once before, and looking at these screenshots, it does seem like the resolution may have been bumped up for higher resolution games. Although this may just be a map editor, and so this may not actually be the game. But I'm not sure I would make the exception in the case of OpenRA. Particularly since when I'm playing like a ScumVM game using the ScumVM emulator, then that's because it just performs better and it still really shows me what I recall the games originally looking like. Whereas if I'm playing something like OpenRA with enhanced visuals and a revamped map editor, then I'm playing something completely different, and at a certain point I really am just reviewing OpenRA using Command and Conquer or Red Alert as just a base comparison, which probably, if I was going to do that, means I should play the game in its available on Steam form first, and then come back and play it with OpenRA and make a comparison if I still feel like it. And that's the other issue, certainly, is that if I was going to play Red Alert and Command and Conquer, that's a huge time commitment. There's just a lot of games in those series, and so I really would want to just kind of powerhouse through all of those games and play them once, because it's going to be such a time commitment not come back and play it with OpenRA. OpenRA certainly would work for people who haven't played these games in a while or who play these games non-stop. Linux kernel 6.12 is out now with real-time capabilities and more gaming handheld support. Real-time flags in the Linux kernel I think have existed for a while, but they've been minimal and they have never been turned on by default. It is still very much the case that even though real-time sounds cool, it's not what you want. The only time you need real-time is, say, you're running Linux embedded into an X-ray machine, and in that case you are down to nanoseconds of radiation, and you have to have it where in those nanoseconds the radiation comes on and turns off. Arguably, a lot of those things perhaps should not even be run by computers, but maybe computers in a real-time operating system are more precise or working at a scale that humans couldn't work at. But yeah, there are actual stories of early medical devices being programmed wrong and doing wrong things and harming people. But for your actual operating system, desktop, and gaming, if there's a fraction of a few nanoseconds of delay, it's unnoticeable, and it's just not worth the overhead and the hassle to have a real-time operating system, and not necessary. It is, I guess, nice to see this new update come out without them having to mention some kind of internal fighting, which there was definitely one person that was pissing off Linus Torvalds. But yeah, enabling preempt _RT. This was their real-time function. Of course, this is just getting into the weeds more than gamers really need to know. The more important thing would be expanded support for things like OXP sensors. I wonder what OXP stands for. I would have to assume these are tilt sensors that all of these use devices have, as far as tilting a handheld. Improved Raspberry Pi support. The fact that the kernel level is going out of its way to support specific devices is a little backwards, but it does also show where the enthusiasm is, even at the lowest level of the Linux programming community, in that they are expanding Raspberry Pi support and ROG Ally X specifically. Can now show QR codes for kernel panics, which you don't want to ever see kernel panics in the first place, and good chance you never will. But without even getting into the details, I want to point out here, when's the last time you saw anybody talk about a Windows update doing anything interesting at all, or even telling you what the Windows updates do. In most cases, it's just we've added security updates or driver updates. It's always this very generic thing that doesn't explain itself and doesn't seem to have really done anything. And I can't help but feel like the update schedule for Windows in particular is designed around keeping either IT people busy or keeping people connecting their computers to the internet so they can push OneDrive and other online services. Whereas, yeah, that may not be the case these days. That very well may have been the case in the past. It's kind of unthinkable that people would disconnect their main PC from the internet, but I could certainly see a lot of internal office computers just being connected to local area networks. I could see even today bosses saying, hey, let's just get rid of the internet browsers and let's just have internal chat and internal email, and then people can't browse and waste time. Certainly internal embedded systems like an X-ray machine has very little reason to be connected to the internet itself. Maybe connected to an internal network, but maybe it should be completely air-gapped and isolated. Moving on, Half-Life 2 free until November 18th. Funny how free has now been expanded to free to keep just because so many things label themselves as free and they really aren't free. And even free to keep on Steam is perhaps not enough of an explanation. It certainly isn't free to own, because you don't own it if you lose access to your Steam account. You can't just download it and install it outside of Steam. You can't disconnect your computer from Steam forever and have it play. Let's see. The Linux GPU configuration tool LACT has added NVIDIA support, which sounds cool. Not sure which versions of Linux actually use LACT, or maybe any version can use it. Inherently, I just ordered a new computer with a AMD GPU, and I am certainly assuming that that will work with Bakelite Linux just fine, but it would be certainly a stupid oversight on my part if it turns out that either the exact model number I got is not supported, or just the AMD GPUs in general are not supported, particularly on Bakelite Linux. Or maybe it will be supported, but another nightmare situation could be that it's not very performant, that it just really does not compare to something like a 4070 or 4080. Not that I have one of those to compare it to. Yep. Definitely with this new computer, I'm going to go in a different direction. Though I'm not going to be running a computer that's running Windows. At least that's not my plan, at least. And as such, my experience will probably vary quite a bit from what other people can expect. Although I want to take that step forward, because my recommendation is almost certainly at this point for people building new computers, particularly if you don't care about Windows 11 or don't care about how it looks too much, should go with Bakelite Linux, and then go with Steam OS if it gets released at some point in the future, and just learn that new operating system, which really won't be that difficult to learn if you are either new to an operating system or familiar with Windows. But yeah, I think Bakelite or Steam OS eventually will be the future. Yeah. Let's see, hybrid gaming controller MoveMaster has a new website and is shipping to the UK now available with 10% off. So how do you hold this? I can't help but think what we're looking at is the wrong side to show the buttons, and that your hand would rest on top of this into these grooves, and then you'd have a button here and a button here, button here, button here, button here, button here, here, and here, which I'm not sure if that is quite enough buttons to do something like stenography. I think you might need a couple more, but yeah, that certainly might be enough buttons. It almost looks like there might be a light sensor of some sort here too, so even just the act of lifting your hand off of it may do something. I want to see a video on this because it's an intriguing thought. Of course, the problem here, oh man, it's an unboxing video. What a waste of time. Let's see if we can skip ahead to something useful. No, this is going to be, the entire video is just going to be taking it out of the box. Yeah, those actually just look like screws. It's bigger than I think most people would expect, and I can't help but feel like even for the model's hands there, it's too big. And that's one of the things certainly about products, is that you have to often work really hard to get things small enough, and the do-it-yourself electronic type projects in particular are going to end up being much bigger than what a finalized product might be. I would assume they make a right-handed version of this, but I certainly could be wrong about that. There might be a way to flip it over and make it a right-handed version. That would make some sense. He's showing off some kind of faceplate there that maybe allows for you to flip it over. Showing off a hex screwdriver, which is just pointless. This is a really stupid unboxing video. They're not even showing off. Yeah, they're almost completely done with the video, and just now they're showing off the actual device, and they're not going to do anything with it. Yeah, there's a lot of intriguing devices like this when to look at, but they're almost like art pieces, really, more than actual practical useful devices. Because let's just face it, with every generation of new people to computers, they've all developed a completely different style of typing, probably one worse than the last. And if you're going to program on computers, you're not going to use something like this. If you're going to game, there's probably cheaper and better gaming one-handed keyboards out there, but it's going to be a very personal feel of whether it fits your hand or whether you like the feel of that. You can only really teach towards your just basic keyboarding on a basic keyboard as far as how to type. With voice being as good as it is these days, there is a decent chance that even at the level of programming, you might be able to talk to a computer to do all your programming. And with AI chat GPT stuff, a lot of the stuff people do, programming or otherwise, might very well be written out for them. Minimal typing on a regular keyboard will minimize the need for any kind of other keyboard. And they're really, I imagine, going to try and sell this as a gaming keyboard more than even an accessibility keyboard, because it doesn't really scream particularly accessible either. But it is an intriguing new look. I guess it is also worth pointing out that we haven't seen anything new said about the accessibility controllers from Microsoft or Sony, or the licensed products from Microsoft and Sony that are accessibility controllers. And they had that new one for Microsoft that they talked about a few months ago. There's just not been any update or anything new to say about it, I guess. I imagine as we get closer to Christmas we might see a commercial, particularly from Microsoft, pushing the accessibility controllers. But they really just do that for an advertisement boost more than any real commitment to being more accessible. You can get a fresh look at Half-Life 2 RTX in the new video, plus the Steam page is now live. I have no idea who this person is, but that's not Gabe Newell. Let's see if we can find some video footage. This is people sitting in what looks like a green screen room interviewing it. Either that or they've just put way too much effort into blurring the background. And the whole place in the background looks to me like it is a stage. It's a very empty room regardless. There is a real problem where here they're showing off like much better visuals, so it looks nicer, but it's just like completely different textures with the ray tracing replacement thing. So it's not the same content at all. And then them showing off shooting a light and the light swinging around and casting lights and shadows all over the place. Sure, I've noticed that in a few games here and there. It's something I might have said, hey, that's kind of funny, or that's an interesting element, that there is no physics built into a light. But it's something that you only notice if you're bored with a game, and if a game is going good, you'll just walk past the lights and not recognize or know whether they're swinging or not swinging. And this over focus on physics and reality in objects that just don't matter is not particularly helpful. Now, I would say, having not actually played any of the Half-Life games, Half-Life as a series was all about showing off the physics and the gravity gun and all of that. So I imagine in that game in particular, bullets or objects would get thrown and hit lights very often, so it swinging around and casting rays of light is something that is probably pretty impressive. But for most games, it just doesn't matter. And if that's where we've really gotten to as far as technological improvements, is that we are just making small tweaks to minor annoyances that most people won't even notice, well then I think games at that point are approaching a point where they've just kind of gonna plateau, and it's going to be as good as it gets as far as visuals and physics, which may be the case, and that is going to have to push developers to do the thing they don't want to do, which is hire more writers and focus more on the story. There's definitely in that documentary Gabe Newell talking about how he didn't want to just give more story for Half-Life 3, that he wanted some new technological improvement, which is what we've heard before. But in that long delay, he probably should have had a drop dead date, is the internal phrase, at which point Half-Life 3 should have just been made, even if there was no new technological story. And I guess that probably is a flaw in how Valve is run in general, is that there almost certainly should, for every project, before a project gets approved, you should calculate a drop dead date, which means that if this project is not finished by this date, then we're going to cancel it and move on to just finishing, particularly in the Half-Life series. It wouldn't have just been a drop dead date, it would have been a drop dead date, and then we're just going to put out a story version of the game without adding any technological improvements. No, almost certainly Valve has also been distracted by VR, which led to Half-Life Alyx, but almost certainly, had they not been distracted by VR, in that same time they could have made Half-Life 3 and finished the story. Moving on, Everspace 2 fixes video playback on Linux and Steam Decks with Proton, which it is nice to say that some games here are focusing on Steam Deck performance and updating themselves, whereas it is also nice to see that Proton is hopefully more generally just fixing compatibility issues for multiple games. The hope is that for every fix that may fix one game, that same fix may be fixing 3 or 4 other games that are just less played, and hopefully breaking no games in the process. Team Fortress 2 gets an update to improve matchmaking. Yep. So Valve is still updating and improving Team Fortress 2, which, yeah, it's almost certainly a case where they wouldn't get rid of Team Fortress 2 unless they can pivot almost everybody from Team Fortress 2 to either CSGO or Counter-Strike 2 now as it's called, or Deadlock when it gets released, which Valve moves so slow. I wouldn't be surprised if it is more of a case that there's just going to be a new generation of players playing Deadlock that is very disconnected from Team Fortress 2 players and Counter-Strike 2 players, and that they can just every 10 years or so come out with another game that is only a slight variation on these same kinds of games and release it and get the benefits of skin sales from that. It is succeeding, but it is succeeding without evolving or improving much. That's going to bring us to GameDeveloper.com articles, which still are broken. So, in a lot of cases, it is going to be a case where until I fix GameDeveloper.com, the new news stories are going to be fairly old, and there will be newer news stories that it won't open, and then it is also opening all the old news stories, which I went through and closed today. So we won't go through a whole bunch of them. Apparently Epic Games is officially cool with the Internet Archive preserving early Unreal games. The Unreal series may have been shelved years ago, but Epic is letting its first 2 installments live on through the Internet Archives. Remember, the Internet Archives, I don't believe, is actually up at the moment. At least last time I looked. And I wouldn't be really more of a case that they really just commented on it, and legally they may not actually own the original Unreal games in the first place. Almost certainly they don't consider the first couple early Unreal games to be competition, nor do I think Epic even really considers the newest Unreal game to be a major focus. They certainly aren't putting Fortnite or early versions of Fortnite on the Internet Archive, which is their big money maker at the moment. Plus, they're probably trying not to get into yet another lawsuit fight with somebody while they are still fighting with Apple and Google, I believe. But yeah. I don't know if there's anything more to be said there. I guess this is an example of also just how game preservation has moved incredibly too slowly for far too few games, most games not being preserved, being actively fought against preservation by the ESA and the Library of Congress, not really caring about game preservation. For these games being on the Internet Archive, there's no concern about people downloading them and playing them recreationally versus research, using it only for research, which was the argument that the Library of Congress made to be anti-game, anti-libraries lending out and preserving digital copies of games. I think they may be able to preserve, but they can't lend out digital copies. But yeah, that was a stupid decision in my opinion. And this doesn't really change that outcome much. It's still very much the realm that the true preservationists of games are the pirates at the moment, are the people that are digitally hoarding all the games as possible in what would be argued are illegal treasure troves of torrents, all on their own personal hard drives in places. Even now, people with floppy disks and CD-ROMs are going to need to preserve those digitally on hard drives because floppy disks are going to start decaying and CD-ROMs are going to start bit rotting. They have been for years, I'm sure. And so you can't just hold on to a floppy disk or CD-ROM and expect it to play in a computer. Not that they really make floppy disk drives or CD-ROM players much these days either. Let's see, we already talked about the Remedy creative director Sam Lake receiving the New York Games Awards and Andrew Yoon Award. It's kind of going to be an ironic situation here as far as there being a New York Games Awards at all, considering how the IT department is striking against the New York Times, which, oh, maybe it's not the New York Times. Yeah, it probably isn't. So what I'm saying doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it'd be weird if the New York Times themselves was giving out game awards. Not that crazy, but yeah, that's not the case. I assume that strike is still going on. I haven't heard any new news around it where the IT people were asking people not to play Wordle and the other New York games in solidarity. And then, yeah, I still just think it's always weird when a creative director gets an award and nobody else gets mentioned. Embracer has divested its mobile studio EasyBrain in a $1.2 billion deal. I'm hearing a weird sound. Let me just check my cameras for a second. Oh, nope, doesn't seem like anything. Maybe that was just on the game. Sorry for the distraction. Moving on. There's this weird kind of chirping sound. Thunderful is restructuring its publishing division and cutting even more jobs. These might be older stories, but it's probably worth mentioning. Laying off between 80 and 100 employees. And that's going to bring us to all the new games on Steam. So let's go through them quickly. And then I am off to work on other things. There's some very late political games coming out. I don't understand why people would be that late to the party. Yeah, this animation is terrible. Perhaps they were stymied by Valve, but only partially, in that they weren't allowed to release before the general election, but were allowed to release after. And I guess that is an interesting thought as far as how does Valve best stymie people making low effort political games. Do you take their $100 submission fee and delay it so it only releases after the election? Or do you refuse the fee and refuse for the game to come out? And I guess in general, if you're just trying to waste people's time, you take the fee and delay it. Of course, it certainly might be better if they just came out more strongly and publicly around saying we don't want political games. Of course, there are going to be people that argue all games are political, and then there are going to be people that ask the question is, what do you mean by political games? And then if you do ask that question, Valve probably doesn't have a good answer. It would cause more concern than it probably is worth to make that kind of announcement. It would be easier to say we don't want any more clicker games. If Steam Direct, for instance, had specific categories that were banned, even if there were just categories that were banned certain months out of the year, that might be an interesting trick. If all of a sudden all clicker games had to come out in January of that year and no clicker game could be released via Steam Direct otherwise, that might squeeze all the clicker games into the same month, competing against each other, effectively cannibalizing each other, so not a single one of them even gains a small amount of success. Of course, all of that kind of rules and regulations just smacks in the face of them wanting more money and them proclaiming to be a libertarian company. Although, in all honesty, they haven't really pushed that thought in years. And I think in general, most people have stopped using the phrase libertarianism much more than sometimes people will call themselves libertarians if they don't want to admit that they're actually more Republican leaning in the United States. This Ice World doesn't look terrible. It's a shame it's so mixed reviewed. It would take a lot. I probably shouldn't have closed that one. Yeah, it definitely would have taken a lot of effort, though, to set something in an icy world and have it feel like it is full of content instead of it just feeling like it's a big ball of ice all the time, ice and snow. I have been watching some pretty awful horror anthology series, and it is a shame that that doesn't really translate to video games, but of course anthology TV or anthology movies are going to be completely different than games. And an anthology of bad games would not work because you just get bored and irritated with the first game and not even see the rest. Whereas sitting through an anthology movie, you're probably comfortable watching on some cheap streaming service, a relatively cheap streaming service. You're not sitting in the theater for these awful horror anthology series. Yeah, I also watched Terrifier 1, and that's a pretty horrible movie, both in the content it shows, but also just in the visuals. It definitely felt like there was some really overly ambitious body prop making stuff there without particularly a good story or any real thought at all as to character building as far as the bad guy Art the Clown. It is at the height of craziness to have him have such a wide variety of weapons, because you're just not consistently establishing him. As a movie called Terrifier, it doesn't really try to do anything to terrify people. That's not his main focus. That was the bad guy. And then there's just far too many victim characters that show up for kind of a bad reason. Yeah. So, yeah, I plan on finding some time probably later tonight because I'm doing a lot of physical activity that exhausts me earlier to watch Terrifier 2, which I imagine will have much more of a budget. That is one of the problems with these horror movies, is that there is a real ambition to do stunts and props and things like that, and that's probably the wrong focus. There is a YouTube video, I believe you can still see, from the maker of the movie Oculus, where he effectively is just making the movie Oculus shorter and at YouTube quality, establishing the conceit and the story and the intrigue without really spending any money at all to do visual effects or props or anything like that. And I'd highly suggest watching Oculus the movie, the actual movie, first, but then watching that and comparing it. That really goes to show where I would think horror movies should start, particularly if you have no budget. It's just take all those shots that are going to be conversations and people, and just find a decent background setting to have those conversations with, and then if you can muster up the budget after that, that's when you start doing the prop works and the shots. Like, do all of the kills off screen in your first round of shooting, particularly if this is like a self-funded project or something that's not being shot by a production studio. Yeah, I really have gotten to the point here where I'm not going to have anything to say about these games. Particularly right now, my focus is just not at video games. But yeah, that would be my suggestion, as somebody who's never done any of that at all and could be completely wrong. But yeah, my suggestion would be have all the kills off screen, have the characters doing a shot, shoulder over shoulder, shot for shot conversations, have the get your actors into a place where they're acting really good and they have great performances, and then after all of that, that's when you start focusing in on the props in the action sequences. because you have a movie there. If you ran out of budget without any props or any kills on screen, you can have a movie where it's just, this person died, it was horrific, here's somebody describing what happened or their reaction to what happened, and then if that works, then you add the actual chilling scenes. Yeah, which is a weird tell don't show suggestion, certainly, when the suggestion is usually show don't tell. But I think, yeah, unless you've got millions of dollars to play with, that you probably should start with tell. Focus more on the story. Any movie that does focus more on the story and the writing is going to be miles ahead of most of the awful horror movies that are just used to seeing really expensive visual effects that aren't going to really happen in your movie. Like, particularly in Terrifier, the mask you see at the very beginning is just awful, to the point where you kind of expect them to rip it off and it not be real at all. But no, apparently that's what it's supposed to be. Anyways, I went through all of those games and didn't really have a single thing to say about any of that. Yep, more work for me to do, so that's going to be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.